I begin this Shabbat with words of gratitude. Many of you were at the federal courthouse with me earlier this week on Wednesday. You filled the benches behind me and bore witness as the judge handed down the statutory limit, the maximum sentence for the human who sent me, or committed a hate crime, I should say. And several of you have reached out at various points, both before and after, to see how I'm doing, to see what Esther's up to be grateful and thankful for what the U.S. Attorney did, and what the judge did, and what others have done. As I was contemplating and thinking through everything, because it took to get to this point, the U.S. Attorney, both Peter Leary and Will Keyes. It took the FBI, and it took many other people who worked behind the scenes to decide to get together and say, we're gonna fight a hate crime. And it made me realize, also in connection to this week's Parsha Yitro, where there's a connection to community. God didn't give Moses the Torah where there was nobody around. God had everyone gather in. God didn't tell Moses what the Torah is exclusively, but decided to demonstrate by having boundaries within the Torah regarding laws that we're supposed to follow, recognizing that you can't set a law without witnesses. And the truth is, if you think about it, what the Israelites had just endured in exiting Egypt was they walked through all of their fear of what it would be like to get recaptured by Pharaoh and come together in front of the mountain to receive revelation and therefore liberation from their fears. This is what Sinai teaches us, or at least has taught me this week. Interestingly enough, also in thinking about that, our Parsha does not begin with the fiery moment at Mount Sinai. It begins with the soft, small, quiet conversation between Yitro and Moses. Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, a Midianite priest, an outsider, came to Moses because he had heard all that God had done. He heard and he came. He showed up. He wasn't Jewish, wasn't part of the covenant, but regardless, he came because the story mattered. And he knew that his presence would make a difference. On Wednesday, the presence of my interfaith colleagues made a difference. Many Christian clergy, civic partners, people who understood that when combating faith, there needs to be more than just one voice present, came. They understood that when you threaten a rabbi, you threaten everybody who's speaking publicly regarding justice issues, when you threaten a Jewish legislator, you're threatening an entire community. When Jethro watches Moses trying to carry everything alone from morning till night, he tells Moses this task is too heavy. You cannot do it alone. Justice, therefore, Yitro teaches, is not a solo act. Trauma that Moses went through, of leading the people out, of going through the Sea of Reeds, cannot be endured alone. And when everybody came and arrived at Mount Sinai, the Torah teaches Israel encamped there on the opposite mountain. And Rashi noticed something particular, something subtle. The verb vayichan, encamped, is singular and not plural. And Rashi teaches as one person in one heart, which doesn't mean that all the Israelites agreed. We all know that's impossible. But it does mean that they were all present together. It doesn't, by the way, being present for one another require everyone being on the same page. It simply means showing up. Being of one heart says, I refuse to abandon somebody else. The boundaries, by the way, that I pointed out earlier, that were explicitly stated by God at Mount Sinai, well, we can kind of think about those as boundaries that we live through in our own society today. Boundaries help define what we deem acceptable. They're matters of clarifying who we are. And when the postcard arrived at my home, it was something that A, was very scary for me, but B, the U.S. attorney was willing to see that it was in fact a hate crime. Because both Representative Panich and I had family members who had been in the Holocaust and died from the exact poison that was on and described on that very card. They understood, thank God, that it was not harassment, that it was anti-Semitism, ancient and modern. Sinai, what did Israel receive? Well, they also didn't receive abstract theologies. They understood and they received boundaries. They understood that there are things that you do as a society and a community and things that you don't. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not bear false witness, was what they were told. They were not private values, they were public mores, lines proclaiming out loud what we find acceptable. Midrash Tanhuma asks, why was the Torah given publicly in the wilderness instead of privately to Moses? And their Midrash answers that no one could later say the Torah belongs only to us. Sinai, therefore, had to be public, witnessed, unclaimed by power. It was done in order to name the boundaries of who we are. In the courtroom on Wednesday, the judge named the boundary of what we find acceptable by giving the maximum sentence, not as revenge, but as prevention. Prevention from the perpetuation of hate crimes, and hopefully, deterrence. The first words, by the way, that God spoke at Mount Sinai, of course, looking at the text itself, again, weren't just the boundaries, and it wasn't everyone coming together, but it was a reminder of a memory. I, the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt. Before the giving of absolute law and the definition of boundaries of what we believe and don't was a liberation. Anti-Semitism, I believe, attempts to tie us down, not in chains, but fear. Don't be visible. Don't speak publicly. Stay quiet. But God's covenant rather begins in freedom. God calls Israel a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A kingdom of priests demands a public presence, visibility of speaking even when it's challenging. That visibility is precisely why Jews were targeted, why Representative Panich and I were targeted. At that hearing, I shared my victim impact statement. The courtroom was full. Interfaith allies stood next to us. Justice was named publicly, and today I am teaching Torah about it from the Bima. This is what Sinai teaches. Revelation requires community. Boundaries require witness. Liberation from fear requires standing together at the mountain. This week, we did have a Sinai moment. Temple Beth Israel, founded in 1859, stood at a mountain before. We have faced anti-Semitism before, and we have chosen to be together in the face of it. I want to thank you for standing with me at the mountain. Thank you for being my Sinai community. Thank you for all that you have given and done. Shabbat Shalom.